Good evening, parents and carers, and welcome to this evening's webinar titled Promoting Healthy Masculinity. Before I introduce our speaker this evening, please note we're not expecting any technical difficulties, but if we do encounter any, please do bear with us. Our next webinar is going to be on Wednesday, the 18th of June, and this will be led by Alicia Drummond, who's the founder of the Wellbeing Hub, and the focus will be on worry, stress, and anxiety. So we hope you can join us for that. As I'm sure you will already be aware, the themes being discussed in this evening's webinar are hugely topical at the moment. And although they are not new conversations at Forest or elsewhere, they have been particularly highlighted in recent months by the media and in government as well, especially following the many conversations around suitable role models for boys and harmful behaviours that can manifest and be exhibited by some young men, as highlighted by the Netflix show Adolescence. At Forest, we're really proud that our RSHE curriculum aims to broach these important conversations with young people right from the start of their time in the senior school. In the lower school, our Year 7 and Year 8 pupils will discuss the impacts of harmful gender stereotypes for both genders and where our ideas about gender stereotypes come from as an important building block to later conversations in the middle school around forming healthy relationships, recognising harmful behaviours and issues surrounding gender-based violence. Our Year 8 pupils will be building on these lessons with an exciting talk tomorrow afternoon from Freddie, which we're really excited about at this important transitional stage before they enter the middle school. We know that these issues are those which affect everybody and are about building healthy, resilient, regulated young people who feel celebrated, safe and seen. Conversations about healthy masculinity are inextricably linked to lots of other conversations around mental health, role models, cultural expectations, body image, and a whole range of other important areas on our curriculum. But we're really excited this evening to be discussing these with a particular focus on cultural messaging around masculinity and the particular challenges faced by teenage boys, which is why we're really thrilled to be welcoming Freddie from Voicebox, who is speaking to you tonight and also to Year 8 tomorrow on this same subject. Voicebox have been promoting healthy masculinity and helping boys and men thrive since 2019. Their Promoting Healthy Masculinity parent webinar, delivered by the Voicebox co-founder and director, Freddie Monk-Porcel, equips parents with an understanding of unhealthy masculinity and healthy masculinity. We're also going to look at the issues affecting men and boys in the 21st century, the influence of social media and the manosphere, and how we can be supporting our boys to embody a healthy masculinity that helps them to thrive. So welcome to Freddie.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Grace. Thank you. Thank you for having me today. Very excited to be here. As Grace mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders of Voicebox, and today we're going to be looking at masculinity, healthy masculinity, and a series of kind of associated themes. So this is our Promoting Healthy Masculinity, Supporting Boys to Thrive webinar. So one of the what and why are we here today? What are we going to be looking at? Well, the purpose of today's session is to deepen our understanding of the issues boys are facing today, explore how we as parents and carers can better support them, and explore how we as parents and carers can promote healthy masculinity and support our boys to thrive. What we're not here to do is sort of point fingers at boys and men, demonize masculinity or maleness, or talk about sort of toxic masculinity. We'll talk about that term a little bit more later on, and we'll go into more detail about that. And why we're here, as Grace has mentioned, right? Promoting healthy masculinity, helping boys thrive, improves outcomes for everyone. When boys are supported to build healthier identities, everybody benefits. And as Richard Reeves mentions, who's a really prominent figure in the kind of men and masculinities field, a world of floundering men is unlikely to be a world of flourishing women. So that's part of what we're going to be looking at today. Before we do that, it's important for us to look at the issues affecting men and boys today at the kind of national level, at the national picture. What are the issues affecting men and boys today? And a recent report called The Lost Boys by the State of the Nation really went into this, and I recommend anybody who's interested in the topic having a look at the report. It's very interesting reading. But the big things that came out there were around education. So, across nearly all key metrics, boys are behind. They're nearly twice as likely to be excluded from education. In employment, and men account for the majority of kind of people not in education, employment or training. In terms of health, men are 3.5 times more likely to take their own lives. 85% of rough sleepers in the UK are men. I think also, in fact, it's not included there, but men on average live around 3 to 4 years less than everybody else. And in terms of crime, 96% of the UK prison population are men. Boys and young men are much more likely to be a victim and perpetrator as well of serious youth violence, kind of physical violence, and more likely to be perpetrators of sexual violence. That's not to say that everybody does, but in terms of the statistics. And so, while complex, research shows that many of these challenges are linked to how boys are socialized. So the ideas of masculinity that we might have, or the pressures they face around what it means to be a man are. And rigid expectations around masculinity and being tough, unemotional, dominant, impact boys in really very tangible ways. In terms of education, if boys believe that asking for help is a weakness, they may be less likely to seek support when they struggle, leading to disengagement or acting out or falling behind. In terms of mental health, if boys believe emotions are weakness, may be more likely to bottle up feelings, increasing risks of anxiety, depression, etc. In terms of relationships, if boys are taught that dominance equals respect and safety, they may struggle with healthy communication, with consent, with emotional intimacy. And in terms of risk-taking behaviors as well, if boys feel that they must always prove toughness, they may be more prone to aggression, violence, or unsafe decisions. And these aren't isolated struggles. They form part of some gendered patterns shaped by the expectations society places on boys. But importantly, these are patterns that we can change. And that's part of what we're here to do today, is to equip parents and carers with the knowledge and the skills to change some of those outcomes for young people. Now, masculinity doesn't just affect men. It also affects the lives of women and girls, as Grace mentioned, and those in the LGBTQ plus communities as well. The issues affecting women are often intertwined with the ways boys and men understand masculinity, understand manhood. Issues like sexual violence, violence against women and girls, misogyny, homophobia, all have links with unhealthy forms of masculinity. And what this tells us is really important, that working with boys on masculinity benefits not only them, but also the people around them and society as a whole. And so this is why the home is so important, because the home is one of the most influential environments in shaping how boys understand masculinity. And without guidance, boys might seek answers in less constructive places, such as social media influencers, online echo chambers, to make sense of their identity. And we'll look at that a little further later on. And, as parents and carers, we have a really powerful opportunity to help boys develop a broader, healthier understanding of masculinity, one that supports their well-being, their relationships, their aspirations, as well as the lives of girls and women, members of the LGBTQ plus community, etc. And so before we do that, it's important to just make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of what is masculinity. It's important to note that it's not quite the same as being biologically male. So being male is about biology, the chromosomes, the hormones, the physical side of things, whereas masculinity is the set of ideas and expectations and sort of stories about how boys and men are expected to behave. So, these ideas aren't fixed. They change across cultures and time periods. For example, in the sort of 17th century, high-heeled shoes were seen as masculine. Nowadays, not so much. In some places around the world, holding hands with another man might be taboo. In other areas, it might not be taboo. So these norms can shift and can change. But some common expectations of masculinity do include things like strength, leadership, risk-taking, stoicism, competitiveness. And these ideas tend to come from culture. So what we see as masculine or feminine, primarily shaped by our environment. From an early age, children absorb messages about masculinity through family roles, behaviors, media and social influences, education and societal expectations, their peers. Now, some expectations may also have biological roots, but research strongly points to a kind of combined role of culture, environment, biology in shaping who we are and our ideas around masculinity and femininity. And so even when boys aren't explicitly taught what it means to be a man, they may be internalizing unspoken rules from what they see around them. It's also important for us to understand that masculinity isn't one fixed thing. It's complex, it's cultural, it's personal, it's evolving. What it means to be a man depends on where you're from, what you've been taught, what's been celebrated, what's been punished. And as we mentioned, kind of 17th century men, tights, high heels, wigs might have been seen as the kind of ideals of masculinity. Now, it also depends on who you are in other ways. So masculinity is shaped by and intersects with factors like race, class, religion, sexuality, disability, neurodiversity, a black boy, a working class boy, a boy of faith, a queer boy, each may face different, sometimes conflicting messages about how they're supposed to be a man. And so if we want to support boys well, it's important to recognize these intersections. And one of the key messages that we want to start threading into our conversations and interactions with boys and men is that there's more than one way to be a man. And the crucial side of this is that we get to shape it as well. We get to decide what that looks like. And also, it's really important to understand that your awareness of this matters, right? We all carry our own values, beliefs, biases around masculinity, shaped by our own experiences and cultures and contexts. These aren't flaws, they're part of being human. But becoming aware is important because our views, often in subtle ways, can shape how we respond to boys. So, how we praise, who we praise, what we praise, who we overlook, what we overlook, what behaviors we encourage, what behaviors we ignore, what behaviors we punish. And these small messages that we send, consciously or unconsciously through no fault of our own, can either reinforce rigid ideas or open up new possibilities. And so this work starts with us as parents and carers and as adults in young people's lives of becoming aware of what are our own expectations of masculinity. Because in order to deal with all of the issues boys are facing, we need to address the beliefs, behaviors, and identities that boys are developing. We need to go upstream to the ideas of what men and boys are being taught about how to be a man. We have to ask the question, what are boys being taught about how to be men? And part of what they're being taught is what we would call unhealthy masculinity. So we don't talk about toxic masculinity. We don't use that phrase because it has its own baggage. It's also become slightly unhelpful. I think it's not particularly specific in terms of what it's talking about. But we talk about unhealthy forms of masculinity. And one of the key things we're talking about unhealthy masculinity is that the other side is healthy masculinity. There's a journey that's possible. We're all on a journey of masculinity, all men and boys. We're all on a journey of masculinity. And so we can help young men and boys and each other to move along this journey of masculinity to something that's a little bit healthier. And in terms of unhealthy masculinity, research has consistently found that boys across different cultures and contexts often face a set of kind of shared social pressures about what it means to be a real man or act like a boy. And this is captured in the Male Role Norms Inventory short form, which is the MRNISF. And this includes sort of 7 pressures. And these come from this well-established psychological model. And while not every boy will experience all of these pressures in the same way or with the same intensity, they offer a valuable lens to help us understand the common gender-specific pressures that shape boys' behavior, self-worth, relationships, etc. And so the 7 common pressures are avoiding anything feminine. So an anti-femininity is really central. So a pressure to distance themselves from anything seen as girly, creating emotional expression, caring behaviors, or showing vulnerability. Being the breadwinner, so a pressure to see financial success, and career achievement is central to their future role, to their value as a man. Showing no emotions, so restrictive emotionality, a pressure to hide sadness, fear, emotional needs, to stay tough even when struggling. Being tough, being physically strong, so pressure to be physically dominant, competitive, resilient, even at the cost of health, safety, well-being. Being sexually active and in control, so heterosexual self-presentation as well is key here. A pressure to show kind of interest in girls, be sexually experienced, and avoid anything that could be read as gay or uncertain in terms of sexuality. Being in charge and dominance, so pressure to be assertive, controlling or in charge in relationships, friendships, and group dynamics, often at the expense of cooperation, healthy relationships, etc. And being self-reliant and often also good with tools is an interesting one. But a pressure to be independent, fix problems alone, display stereotypical sort of masculine skills like mechanics or DIY. Sometimes this can manifest as sportiness, athleticism, even when not necessarily interested or confident in these things. So those are some of the 7 kind of common masculinity pressures that boys face. Now, that's by no means an extensive list. There are lots of other things that can be present. Often we see an idea around kind of trying as being seen as unmasculine, so trying too hard in education being seen as unmasculine. So there can be other things going on, but most boys will be experiencing at least some of these pressures at some point in their lives from various different areas of their lives. And so unhealthy masculinity is a set of harmful rules that boys learn about how to be real men. Not every boy learns or follows these exact rules. They are common, and all boys will have been exposed to these ideas in various different areas of their lives. And one of the key ideas to understand about unhealthy masculinity as well is that it's very rigid. So some rules are harmful. Right? Avoiding femininity can lead to misogyny. That can be harmful in and of itself. Showing no emotions can be linked to poor mental health. Being sexually active and in control, can lead to harmful sexual behaviors, a pressure to be sexual, non-consensual behaviors. But others might be positive. Strength and toughness are positives and can be positive in people's lives, resilience, etc. But having to live up to these rules all the time is part of what causes the harm. If you have to be strong all the time, there's no room for vulnerability. There's no room for anxiety. There's no room for sadness. There's no room for the millions of stresses that you're going to experience throughout your life. There's no room for communicating any of that. And so, if you're not strong, you're immediately weak. If you show emotion, you're immediately soft. If you don't dominate, you've failed as a man. And so this rigidity creates pressure, fear, shame. Some theorists call this gender role strain, but essentially the strain of having to live up to masculinity otherwise in order to not suffer the negative consequences. And so these rules are underneath how boys behave at school, in relationships, online, and it's part of what drives their behavior. And these rules are often learned from social interactions, most importantly, particularly in adolescence. The role of the peer group becomes really important as younger children, but also in adolescence as well. The role of the home, social interactions in the home, with parents, with caregivers become really important. And what's important to understand as well about unhealthy masculinity is that not all boys want or are able to live up to these rules. Those who don't fit in and don't perform masculinity correctly often suffer the consequences, things like bullying, shame, rejection, and in extreme circumstances, even violence. And sometimes that violence is quite commonplace. I remember a couple of weeks ago, I was running a workshop with some primary age students, and we were talking about this policing of masculinity, this rigidity. And 3 or 4 different children had examples of how they had experienced somebody saying, "You shouldn't do that, you're a boy," or "You shouldn't do that, you're a girl." And all 4 of them, that message went alongside some form of kind of violence. That was a kick or a hit or a slap from other members in the peer group. So often, there's violence as well in the way that this is policed, in the way that this is reinforced as well. And so the cost is, being sidelined, mocked or excluded, bullied, harassed, or even worse, for stepping outside of this rigid idea of what masculinity might look like. And so unhealthy masculinity marginalizes boys who don't fit in, and it marginalizes boys who are authentic to themselves. It actively discourages authenticity. And for boys who try to live up to the expectations, this masculinity still isn't something you are. It's something you have to prove again and again. It's one of the key ideas about unhealthy masculinity is you're always at risk of having your real man card revoked. You're always at risk of somebody calling you unmasculine. You're always at risk of losing that status. And so it's unattainable. We can't ever be always strong. No human being can ever be always strong. No human being has ever not cried in their life. No human being is always confident, never doubting. And so there's a constant pressure to continue doing masculinity correctly or suffer the negative consequences. And the fact that it's unattainable only adds to that pressure, that shame, etc. And this pressure can be exhausting, right? And while a successful performance is often rewarded with status and acceptance, it still comes at a cost. Even if we perform masculinity correctly, it may not benefit us because the things that we're living up to aren't necessarily very good for us. Things like never showing emotion. Even if we achieve that, what is the benefit of that? We need to be strong and resilient sometimes, but if we can never show our emotions, if we can never be emotional, then that's not a healthy way to live. It impacts our relationship with our own emotions, our mental health, relationships with other people. And so unhealthy masculinity is harmful. This is coming out of the research now, that, it discourages mental health help seeking. So a fear of being seen as weak or less of a man for showing emotion or asking for help often stops boys and men from accessing the support that they need. Okay. Equally, limiting emotional connection and friendships and norms discouraging vulnerability can prevent boys and men from forming close, intimate friendships, which impacts their self-esteem, their emotional resilience, long-term well-being. It can reduce the disclosure of sexual violence and physical violence and other forms of abuse as well. Boys are significantly less likely than girls to disclose sexual violence, in part due to the expectation that real men should be tough and in control. Now, it's important to say there that everybody finds it difficult to disclose abuse and sexual violence, etc. It's important to acknowledge that at that point. And it also contributes to harmful sexual behaviors in relationships. So rigid masculinity norms are linked to increased aggression, difficulty forming close relationships, higher rates of involvement in harmful sexual behaviors as well. And so the key things to understand about unhealthy masculinity are that it's a rigid set of expectations about how to be a real man. Boys who don't or can't fit the script may face bullying, exclusion, or shame. Boys who try to live up to it face constant pressure to prove themselves, often through harmful behaviors. Unhealthy masculinity rewards some with status, but it limits all boys, stunting emotional growth and keeping boys from being their full, authentic selves. And when we understand these pressures boys are under, we can guide boys toward healthier identities and address the harm at its roots as well. And so one of the most powerful forces shaping boys' identity, including their ideas about masculinity, girls, relationships, self-worth, is social media. And what, in a moment, I'm going to share a video of what boys are actually seeing, hearing, absorbing, often daily, through the kind of algorithm-driven social media platforms. And what I like, it's important to say here that it moves quickly, just like real TikTok or YouTube Shorts feeds. You're not expected to catch every detail. Instead, what I like to do while you're watching this is to just think about what themes or patterns or messages jump out at you. What feelings does it create, if any? What lessons are boys being taught directly or indirectly about manhood, about relationships, etc. Now, some of these clips are a bit difficult to watch. They might include some harmful messages, misogyny, explicit language. Please take care of yourself as you do watch this. Everybody's at home. If you need to take a time out, whatever, please do so. And it's important to mention at this point that my colleague Andy, created a brand new TikTok account, set it up as if he were a 14-year-old boy, and spent 15 minutes searching terms like motivation, how to get girls to like me, how to get rich, gaming, things like the Sidemen. Didn't search for anything harmful, but very quickly, the algorithm filled the feed with the content you're about to see, and we've summarized some of that content here. So let's make sure that this, okay, let's...
You are telling the person that they're better than you, right?
Boys talk, men act. Boys play, men build.
Next time your girlfriend says, let's go movies. No, no movies. I'm locked in. I'm getting rich.
How to gain respect like mafia.
If you want a girl to be obsessed with you, here's some things that we actually go crazy for.
If you don't change what you're doing and how you do it, nothing else will change.
Yo, Pierre, I've been feeling lonely and I think I need a girlfriend. How do I get one? You don't need one. You want one to fill that void of loneliness. Yeah, but I've been alone for a while. You feeling lonely is not because you're alone, it's because you're not happy alone, and those are two completely different things. So what should I do instead? Your current mindset is, I feel lonely, so let me get a girlfriend. So what? You need an external factor to fix that? Well, what else would I do? Why do you need another person to fix that for you? Be your own source of happiness. Work on yourself. Train and see progression. Discover a passion and develop it. Set goals, invest time into achieving them. Okay, but when will I get a girlfriend?
You look like a pussy. Here are 3 ways that you can change that and become more masculine. The first way is to train your neck. Look at these.
Love you, bye.
Take care.
Oh, look at him! Look at him staring at the bunda.
Ugh. She's got bunda.
It's never too late. If you're alive, you can get better. If you're alive right now, you can improve your condition.
Do women need men in this world?
No. Fuck no. A woman is trapped in an overturned SUV.
Men need to do this. Men need to do that. What duties do women have in society? What are the actual women's duties towards men? Everybody is raised from the time they're kids how we're supposed to treat women. We all know how to treat women. We never talk about how men are supposed to be treated.
There's only one rule in this fucking jungle. When the lion's hungry, he eats.
Yo. Palmer, Bellingham, Saka, Tor.
It's okay to be a man.
It's not okay. It's necessary.
Remember one thing. Through every dark night, there's a bright day after that. So no matter how hard it get, stick your chest out, keep your head up, and handle it.
I think you have to be a little bit broken as a man to trust your woman when she's going out partying and clubbing.
Rich people don't sleep 8 hours a day.
Women deserve less, or men need to know more.
Combination of the two.
You know the best way to stop depression? Work your ass off.
Do you have any advice to men that are getting older and becoming chronically aware of that?
Yeah, lift weights, do jiu-jitsu, go for runs, stretch out, eat good, stop drinking. It's pretty straightforward.
If you text a girl but she takes hours to reply, she's keeping you as an option.
What's the worst thing a guy can do?
I guess be nice.
Be nice.
Because sometimes if you're too nice, it gives like, it's like the ick.
Really?
You know?
If you are not where you want to be, cut the women. They are distractions.
You can do anything you want. Just don't focus on girls. Stay away from females. They're a distraction.
Girls are distractions.
Straight up.
I think a relationship is a distraction unless you're ready for that.
Focus on yourself. Eat healthy. Take a lot of showers. Read. Reading is important.
Will have the addiction weapon. Any girl you use this weapon on will become addicted to you. Believe me. Today, in this video...
Look at my eyes, tell me your tale. Do you see the road? I'm out to my soul. Tell me this.
Okay. Thank you. Great.
Biggest mistake.
There we go. And so, you know, what I would like everybody to do after having just watched that is, you know, just have a think about, you know, what themes, patterns, or messages jump out at you. You know, what feelings does it create, if any? What lessons are boys being taught directly or indirectly? You know, are there any positive lessons, messages? If you watch that feed every day, what might you start to believe about yourself, about girls, about life? And what's missing from the feed as well, right? And so the key themes that come up in the manosphere is things around relationships, dating advice, motivation, mindset, mental health, wealth and getting rich, gaining respect, attitudes towards girls and women, you know, victimhood, the world being against men, and kind of ideas around being a man, you know. And what's interesting to note is first time I watched that video, my colleague compiled it and I watched it. It moved me to tears. I started crying. I had to take a little break myself from it. I think the big thing that comes out of it is there isn't very much good advice in there from my point of view. That even when there are moments of good advice, so the video where the young man is talking about, you know, work on yourself. You feel lonely. You don't necessarily need a girlfriend to fill that hole of loneliness. You can work on yourself. You know, all these positive things. The next video, immediately saying, "Oh, you look like a pussy." That's not something that we've changed the order of. That is how the algorithm served that up. So essentially, the first video that had some good advice was immediately followed by something that was demasculating, suggesting about anti-femininity, etc. So there is something in the algorithm and the sorts of messaging that it is giving to young people about masculinity, their ideas of themselves, etc. And so these platforms are shaping boys' beliefs, their values, their identities. And teens tend to spend 4 to 5 hours a day on social media, some more, some less. So it's important that we're aware of the kind of messaging that is happening on these platforms, particularly around masculinity, gender equality, gender, women and girls, etc. And so a major new report on the young men's health in a digital world, Movember Foundation, surveyed over 3,000 young men across the UK, US, and Australia. Some of the key findings that it found were that this is a mainstream issue. So 63% of young men regularly engage with this kind of content, which means 37% don't, which is brilliant, but 63% do. Many find the content they consume entertaining, motivating, and empowering, gives them a sense of control, right? They also report feeling distressed, worthless, turning to steroids or diet pills. And there are now reports, I think, of young men as young as 13 turning to steroids and so on, which is incredibly harmful. But also it has a massive impact on misogyny, right? Regressive views about women were alarmingly widespread, stoked by narratives of resentment, victimhood, etc. And this is the first major study to kind of center young men's own voices about the content they're engaging with online. And what this tells us is that, you know, the landscape is complex. There are elements that support, others that deeply harm, right? It's not just that it's all bad, so we should ban it. And if we want real change, you know, we need to listen to boys, understand why this content resonates, and co-create better solutions with them. So, you know, what is this world they're entering, and why does it resonate with them? And this is part of what's called the kind of manosphere, which is a loosely connected web of online communities, and influencers focused on men's issues and masculinity. And while some content does offer practical guidance on fitness, wealth, or dating, many also promote things like anti-feminism, misogyny, transphobia, rigid gender roles. And often a lot of the content is built around fitness and health, dating and relationships, entrepreneurship and economic success, ideas of anti-feminism, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, and can have ideas of unhealthy masculinity being reproduced through all of the messaging. And some of the kind of common actors within this space, people like Andrew Tate, and I'm sure many of us have heard of, Roberta Zagalis, Myron Gaines, Mike Thurston, Hannah Pearl Davis, Aidan Ross, Nico, Fresh and Fit, Hamza Ahmed, Dan Bilzerian. They're common kind of actors within the manosphere space. And this content resonates because it gives boys certainty, pride in their identity, and a map to living up to unhealthy masculine norms. And it provides a simple worldview, that men are under attack. We must fight back. Promise of success, follow these rules. You'll be rich, strong, desired, have the girl of your dreams. A sense of brotherhood as well. So a space where boys feel understood and not judged. And clarity on masculinity, clarity on the rules of manhood, and what to aspire to as a man. And for boys who feel alienated, this can be powerfully appealing, even if the messaging is deeply flawed. And it speaks often directly to real and unmet needs here. So boys can feel or wonder, why do I feel anxious or lost? Why don't girls like me? Why am I always behind? Why don't I feel respected? Those sorts of things they might be struggling with as a teenage boy, adolescence. I'm sure we've all maybe blocked it out from our brains, but I remember it being a very difficult time. It's an incredibly confusing time. So they have all of these problems, all these issues, all of these struggles that they're dealing with. If they go online and they search for answers for some of these, things like how to be more confident, how to get girls, how to get rich quick, how to be a real man, they end up with harmful messaging and harmful content. Things like alpha mindsets, discipline culture, toxic dating advice, hustle content tied to kind of self-worth around, material success is the only way to build identity, gender performance and control, and those sorts of things. And so what's important to understand here is that there are real and unmet needs that are being filled by social media. Online masculinity influencers often resonate with young men and boys because they speak to these real and pressing issues that they face, issues that aren't always necessarily acknowledged or addressed potentially in mainstream discourse, or that boys feel aren't receiving the attention they should, or that they maybe don't feel supported with it either. And so these issues can include things like mental health, emotional struggles, socioeconomic anxiety, cultural and gender identity confusion, or a need for direction and purpose around masculinity, relationships, social challenges, body image and health. And it's interesting to see how some of these map onto some of the rules within unhealthy masculinity, right? Showing no emotions, being self-reliant, map onto mental health and emotional struggles, potentially being sexually active and in control onto kind of relationship struggles, being tough and physically strong, again, mental health struggles, and being the breadwinner, socioeconomic anxiety. And so some of these anxieties are linked to unhealthy masculinity. And many of them are linked to some of the common unhealthy masculine pressures, a need to live up to these unrealistic pressures. It's part of what is drawing men and boys in. And so the key point here is that boys aren't going online to find hate or to find harmful content. They're going online to find answers, identity, meaning, belonging, community, in a world where they often feel potentially misunderstood, blamed, or invisible. And too often, boys are positioned as the problem, right? And their struggles, they may feel are overlooked, or they may well be overlooked. And there are a few spaces where they can explore or feel proud of being male in a positive, healthy way. And often when we talk about masculinity, it's sort of problem focused. And, the real problem is what they find when they get there. That's what they find when they go online. Harmful extremes offer easy, seductive, and damaging answers. Algorithms reward outrage, pushing boys deeper into polarized echo chambers. Offline support is sometimes lacking as well. Many boys don't feel like they have safe spaces to explore masculinity healthily as well. And so boys aren't the problem. The problem is the vacuum and what's filling it. And often the way in which the conversation about unhealthy masculinity is being had can further this confusion, this frustration, this disengagement. We find whenever anybody talks about toxic masculinity with their young people, it immediately kind of creates barriers rather than the bridges that we need to be engaging in conversations about masculinity. And boys often hear that certain aspects of masculinity are toxic. And while it is incredibly important that we acknowledge how unhealthy masculinity can be harmful, as we've established. The way that this conversation is framed can sometimes make boys feel like masculinity itself is the problem, rather than a harmful version of it that pushes boys and men towards harmful attitudes and behaviors. And this can make boys feel defensive or cause them to shut down. Instead of engaging in conversations about masculinity, they may retreat into spaces that validate their frustrations, often leading them toward the manosphere, harmful online actors. And this is why we recommend never talking about toxic masculinity, but about unhealthy forms and expressions of masculinity as well. And if we don't bring boys into the conversation and listen to them, they'll go elsewhere for answers. And this isn't to say that we're not doing this, but it's important to understand the sorts of things that push boys away from wanting to talk to us about these things as well. And so the problem isn't that boys searching, it's what they find when they're searching. So real problem is the vacuum. If we don't provide better answers, somebody else will. So how can we provide those better answers, right? It's understandable to maybe feel a little bit panicked. Our boys, masculinity, social media, and the future. But panic isn't necessarily going to help. And so we need to think about what is going to help. And that is curiosity over blame. What's really going on here? Compassion over judgment. How would it feel to be in his shoes? And conversation over silence. Let's talk about it, even if it's awkward or messy. This is the single most important one. Is that what most boys are crying out for is a conversation about masculinity with the people in their lives. This is what we really need to be focusing on. Because crucially, when young men critically engage in masculine norms, they're more likely to adopt healthier, more flexible identities. And the more that we challenge rigid masculinity, the more space we create for healthier, more authentic ways of being a man. Boys are searching, often struggling for a identity, for a masculinity that works for them, and we want to be able to help them with that. And so also crucially, this would benefit everybody, as we've mentioned, that certain unhealthy masculine norms play into things like violence against women and girls, sexual violence, misogyny. So, men and boys who believe certain ideas that are very linked to unhealthy masculinity are more likely to use or permit violence against women and girls as well. So just to reiterate that promoting healthy masculinity is not a zero-sum game. It doesn't mean that we're not focusing on women and girls anymore. It is part of the solution for everybody involved. And so why healthy masculinity? Well, we need to offer an alternative, a way to take pride in masculinity without resorting to rigid or harmful ideas. And this isn't about telling boys what they can't be. It's about showing them what they can be. It's about opening possibilities. And it's about giving them the tools to reflect, think critically, and define masculinity for themselves, and giving them the tools for healthy connection and belonging. So we need to offer that alternative. And part of the way that we do that is by understanding what is healthy masculinity. So the healthy masculinity framework that we work with is about supporting boys to move from rigidity into flexibility, from pressure into authenticity, and from rejection into reframing. And what that looks like is, that many boys grow up hearing there's only one way to be a man, and we need to challenge that. So we need to help boys challenge the narrow rules they're given and show them that there's more than one way to grow into manhood. Things like you don't have to limit yourself because of external expectations, and you don't have to behave in a certain way just because you're a man, etc. And it's important as well that we don't want masculinity to be something boys have to prove or perform. We need to guide boys to stop performing in line with pressures and start exploring, who am I? What matters to me? How do I want to show up in the world? So grounding it in personal values, which then helps them live up to authenticity. And a little bit more on that in a second. And so being a man starts with knowing yourself, starts with being in line with your values and how you want to be and the kind of man that you want to be, rather than these external pressures that we've had dictated to us. It's about choice. And then finally, it's also about reframing. So instead of telling boys that traditional masculine expectations are toxic, we can work with and reframe and channel traits like strength, leadership, courage in healthy ways. Things like real strength includes care. Real leadership uplifts others. Real courage means asking for help. So it's not about throwing everything out. It's about just slightly tweaking some of these ideas that are within existing ideas of masculinity, to make sure that they are working for men and boys. And part of that is undoing the rigidity, so they have a kind of cyclical relationship with each other if we do that. And so we're going to have a look now at kind of how we shift from knowing about boys, knowing about masculinity, showing up for them in ways that are practical, relational, masculinity informed. And so the key concepts to understand when we're thinking about promoting healthy masculinity is that we need to challenge the rigidity of unhealthy masculinity and harmful norms. We need to provide clear guidance on masculinity and healthy masculinity, provide the space for those conversations to happen. And we need to ensure that our boys feel heard, supported, validated. And we're going to go into some ways of how to do this. And it's important to say these are just suggestions. In an hour-long webinar, couldn't possibly go into all the ways that we can do this. But it's also important that you find what works for you and your family and the young people that you work with. So when building relationships, with the young people in our care and promoting healthy masculinity, it's crucial that we're authentic within that process. It's important that we do this in a way that's authentic to us, our families, and the relationships that we have with the young people. But one of the most important ways for us to promote healthy masculinity is by ensuring that we're not policing boys into unhealthy masculinity, not using any language that reinforces harmful ideas of masculinity. So we need to ensure that we're eliminating harmful phrases at home that promote unwittingly, subconsciously, through no fault of our own. We've all grown up in this gendered water. We might all be using some of this language just because it's been normalized. But if we can have a bit of awareness around these sorts of forms of language and stop using them, we can really stop promoting slightly harmful ideas of masculinity. And this table will be available in some of the resources that we'll link to at the end of this webinar, so you don't have to digest it all in now. But there are things like, you're a big boy, stop crying, boys don't play with that, you're so brave. Things like, don't let people walk all over you is an interesting one. You're the man of the house now. Things like this that sort of force men and boys into slightly rigid ideas of what masculinity is. And we want to be replacing that with healthier alternatives, basically. So another thing that we can do as well is providing clarity on healthy masculinity. So what's important to understand here is that every family is different. There's no right time or place. It could be in the car, on the dinner table, during a walk, FaceTime. What matters most is that we do make that space regularly and consistently. One of the key things here is about consistency throughout the whole of promoting healthy masculinity, to talk about what it means to be a man in your family. And it's important to understand here as well, men and boys often prefer shoulder-to-shoulder interactions rather than face-to-face. So things like the car is a really good time. It's why a lot of kind of men's support groups involve things like, say, fishing or woodworking, because men often like having an activity that's going on and then they can engage in kind of meaningful conversation rather than having that face-to-face. It feels a bit threatening for some reason. It's part of what's coming out of the kind of data. And so, I'd encourage you to think about when and where feels like a good time and place for you to have conversations about what it means to be a man within your family, with the young people in your care. And the three key priorities here are about being real. So modeling that honesty and authenticity, letting the young person in your care see the real you, and also understanding I might not have all the answers, right? Sometimes we find it quite powerful when somebody asks a question in the workshop. I go, actually, I don't really know. We're just part of what we're having to work out together as boys and men. It's important that we're curious, asking questions without judgment. It's important that we're kind to ourselves and our sons as we navigate this together. And we're in a cultural moment at the minute where we are starting and trying to work out what healthy masculinity looks like. Even within academic research, right? We did a big kind of academic research project a couple of months ago, and out of that came the fact that approximately 75% of the academic literature is all on unhealthy masculinity, and only 25% is actually on healthy masculinity and promoting healthy masculinity. So as a culture, we're starting to wrestle with this question of what does the alternative look like? We've identified a problem. We're now thinking about what the problem looks like. And part of that is just all of us working that out together. And so part of what I would suggest saying to kind of start the conversation is, that if saying I went to a parent webinar recently about what it means to be a man. I never really talked about this with my parents. I think it's good that we're more open about this, and I want to have this conversation with you. Have you ever thought about what being a man means to you? It can be a good kind of starting point. And look, if you feel confident with this, that's great. Keep doing what's working. If you don't, that's also okay. Most of us weren't taught how to have these conversations. And so, we might feel a little bit unconfident because we might not have a lack of experience or practice. Often taking the first step is the hardest. We may feel like we have a lack of knowledge. We don't need expertise with this. We just need presence and care and a willingness to engage in this conversation so that our young men feel heard and feel like they have an avenue to talk about this issue within their lives. And we may also be unsure how the young person in our life will respond. What's important is that you focus on opening the door. The young people get to decide when to walk through, how they walk through it, but we just need to open the door and make them aware that the door is there. And so, as mentioned, we suggested 3 key principles of being real, being curious, and being kind. Just a reminder. What's also important here is to ground the conversation in personal values. So what kind of friend, brother, boyfriend, or son do you want to be? What values are most important to you? Because that helps young people start thinking about their values, who they want to be, and whether these traditional ideas, unhealthy ideas of masculinity help them live up to that or not. And that's part of the kind of exploration that needs to happen. And in a conversation about masculinity, they're layered. They don't follow a script. So it's important that we follow our instincts from this kind of opening. From there, we follow our instincts. Our role isn't to judge or correct, but to listen, ask questions, and explore together. Now, we might want to offer specific guidance. If your child opens up about something difficult, we might want to offer specific guidance. It's important to remember that our young men already face many pressures about how to be a man. We don't want to add more expectations, more pressure. Instead, we want to create a safe, pressure-free space where we can explore who he wants to be together. Being a man, being a person is about knowing what truly matters to you, working towards that. We want to help them explore that by exploring the personal values. And this kind of self-reflection is about promoting sort of personal values, personal leadership. It might be helpful to write a family or individual kind of set of values that we can refer back to as well. We can make this visible. We can come back to it again. But the key takeaway here is that there isn't a new set of ideas for how to be a man. Rather, it's about creating space to support our sons in figuring out who they really are. Now, we may come across a situation where some of the views or opinions or thoughts that come up might be problematic. We might think that they're harmful. And if they do express that, it's important that we don't panic. We need to remember that they're shaped by the world around them. They're children. They're developing their identities. At this point, I always talk about the fact that as a teenager, I was a rugby playing macho man who spent 7 hours in the gym every day, every week, wanting to go into the military, misogynistic, harmfully masculine, aggressive, etc. And I now do this work. So just because somebody expresses something that might feel alarming doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to turn out badly. So it's important that we don't kind of panic and freak out at that point. What it is important to do is meet them where they are with curiosity. So tell me more about that. What makes you think that? Where does this opinion come from? Where have you heard that before? We want to be just engaging in a bit of an exploration about this. We want to be avoiding criticism. The goal is to keep the conversation open so he knows that he can speak honestly with you. Whenever we run workshops with young people, we always say, if you have an opinion in your head and you think you shouldn't say it, that's the opinion I want to hear. Because I want to have a conversation with you about some of the ideas that you have that you might think are taboo or problematic, etc. Because then we can engage with it. If you never say it, I never know it's there, and that's when some of the harm might happen. And so we do want to guide young people into understanding how their views could be harmful. So we do want to set certain boundaries. If it's something particularly harmful, we don't talk about that in our family. But we also want to engage in a guided reflection of the impact of a view or belief later on. And we try not to engage in a debate about the finer details as well, but again, having that guided reflection on the opinion. And so some of the ways that we can do that is by kind of lightly exploring the impact without shame. We want to help them consider the ripple effects without blaming, without shaming. So we want to try, what do you think the impact might be of this opinion on you, your relationships, mental health? What do we think the impact might be on other people? Is this opinion helping you show up in the world how you want to show up? So the tone is, let's think about this together. Not you've caused harm, explain yourself. Okay. And so some of the things that we can do to remember when facilitating these conversations is remember to hold the space, being open, seeing beyond some of the harmful attitudes that might come up, allowing space for this conversation, considering kind of what's not being said. So are there things that they don't feel comfortable talking about? Do we want to create that space for that? And offering different perspectives and guidance in a gentle kind of facilitator way rather than as a, just in a gentle way. And so the key to these parent-son conversations is about staying in the room, listening, asking critical questions, but not criticizing. In short, relate first and connect first, and then critique and explore second. And so the kind of An example of this might be, so you think being a man means not crying. That makes sense. See that in lots of areas of life, in films, etc. What impact might a pressure not to cry have on you, have on your mental health? I think a strong man is someone who can show his emotions. I think that takes guts. But what impact do you think that idea might have? So research shows that boys do want to talk about manhood with trusted adults, particularly when trusted adults open that door. So framing masculinity as something flexible, values-based, helps protect mental health, reduce risky behaviors, etc. And the key thing to remember here is that flexibility and authenticity are key. There isn't just one way to be a man. We want to ground these conversations in core values, but stay open-minded. And this approach helps us build his own healthy, evolving idea of masculinity. We're there to create the space and to help with a guided exploration of what might be healthy and not healthy, rather than to tell them who to be. And so some of the other things that we want to be doing is kind of modeling emotional literacy. So helping our boys build emotional vocabulary and confidence to share. Boys are often taught to be fine, to not show their emotions. But emotional suppression, as we've mentioned, is linked to worse mental health, aggression, lack of empathy in later life. And so we want to celebrate moments of emotional vulnerability, listen without rushing to fix, and we want to engage in active listening. We want to reflect back what we hear, etc. I once heard active listening described as position yourself as an editor for a news article. You have to distill a long and long-winded story into a headline, into its compelling essences. So if we're listening for that, then we can reflect that back, and it helps people feel like they've been listened to. And so some of the things that we might want to do is narrating our own emotional experiences, once a day or whenever we can. So, I was frustrated in that meeting earlier. I had to take a minute. Or, and if we see emotional difficulty in our young people, we want to use I noticed, I noticed you quite off school, anything on your mind, don't have to talk about it now. Something's bothering you, I'm here. The key here is consistency. Consistent, low pressure conversations grow emotional literacy, a key predictor of resilience, something that we want to be building in all the time, basically. Now, it's also important, particularly.
Okay, so
it's also particularly important that boys see their fathers expressing the full range of human emotion, grief, joy, fear, tenderness, without shame. But all parents can encourage their sons to inhabit their full range of emotions. And this is also particularly key in moments of dysregulation. So often boys' poor behavior, disrupted behavior is a symptom of emotional dysregulation. They're feeling frustrated, anxious, etc. And don't know how to express that or regulate that healthily. And we're just going to watch a video now, which is a really nice example of role modeling emotional expressiveness, which is in this clip with Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman.
My daughter, it's helped me,
Yeah, I think men too. I don't know why men have an issue talking about their feelings. If I don't,
I recently, it's a change for me. Talk to my kids. I was a little bit old school. I thought, don't burden them. If you're anxious, and then all of a sudden, someone said to me, he said, but when you get anxious, say you got an opening night or you're hosting the Oscars, for 3 weeks before, my mind and I go a little distant. And he said, but your kids don't know that you've got the Oscars. That's why maybe they're thinking you're mad with them. They've done something. And I was like, oh, no, really?
Yeah.
And so now I will now say to them, I had to make an uncomfortable phone call yesterday. And I actually just said to my son, I said, I've got to make this uncomfortable phone call. I'm a bit nervous about it. If I seem a bit off, well, that's why. And he goes,
great.
Oh. And then he said, how did the call go, Dad? I said, I feel so much better. Like it was.
And he feels a part, because you're his hero. He feels a part of your world as well. It's Sean Levy actually told me something that stuck with me forever too, is that people tend to only talk about their wins. But I think it's really important for your kids in particular to know that you lose.
Right.
You don't get what you want all the time. Something you worked on really hard didn't work.
Yeah.
Something you feel like you said something embarrassing today. You did something that didn't sit right with you. It's so important that they see that and they don't just hear about, Dad nailed it, because you lose so much more than you win.
True.
But anyway, Sean gave me that, and it's really stuck with me.
And so that's a really nice example of how we can be embedding this in our relationship with our young people as well.
There you go.
It's also important to kind of role model consent as well. Right? This is really important for young men, but also for all children, because we need to be building this in from a young age, so that it's something that they are familiar with and that they are engaging with when they start having relationships as well. So we want to be modeling consent in everyday interactions. We want to be normalizing discussions about respect in friendships, romantic interactions, kind of sharing and using age-appropriate resources, books, videos. So there's some great resources on the NSPCC website and lots of others out there online as well. We also want to be sort of staying curious about their digital world. So again, we want to be building trust and a bit of influence over what they're seeing and believing online. You know, social media, YouTube, gaming, shape boys' values about status, gender, violence, self-worth, often without adult oversight. We want to create an environment where we're involved and aware of their digital diet in some ways as well. What we want to do is replace policing with a curiosity and conversation. So something that we might want to do is a kind of weekly 10-minute ritual. You know, ask what's one interesting, funny thing you saw online this week. Potentially even ask what's one thing you didn't agree with online as well. You know, don't jump to judgment. We want to use what they say as a springboard. Interesting. What do you think they were trying to say with that clip? Do you agree? And again, having that slight guided exploration of these topics. And again, ongoing conversations rather than just rules lead to better decision making and fewer risky behaviors online as well. And we can also point them towards positive role models, right? Online as well. So, you know, some of the ways that we can recognize positive male role models in the media might be those who challenge unhealthy masculinity directly. They challenge the rigidity by stepping out of the man box. They embody authenticity. They embody emotional and relational health as a key part of their identity. You know, Jamie Lang recently, you know, he basically was all over the media, sobbing his eyes out after this incredibly difficult thing that he'd done. And that's slightly breaking these ideas of masculinity as well. So we can be finding these examples like Terry Crews, Roman Kemp, Jamie Lang, Jordan Stevens as well. And we also have a list of kind of positive role models in our accompanying toolkit and the resources as well at the end of the talk. And one thing that we can do and that we really recommend as well is having a kind of monthly check-in chat. So a monthly ritual. We'll check in emotionally, talk about life, open the door to trickier stuff, including gender, relationships, fears, masculinity. We want to choose a relaxed setting, a walk, car ride, hot chocolate. And again, we want to remember that shoulder to shoulder. And we want to use potentially three simple prompts. You know, one good thing that happened this month, one hard or confusing thing that happened this month, anything on your mind you've wanted to ask or talk about. My wife talks about, and with me sometimes talks about high, low, and ha-ha. So, you know, one funny thing, one high from this month, and one difficult thing from this month. But again, it's about that consistency. It's about that making sure that young people feel like they're able to talk about the things that are on their minds, particularly boys are able to talk about masculinity and their ideas of manhood as well. And so, you know, this predictability, if we do it regularly, lowers the pressure. Kids know it's coming, makes deeper conversations feel more normal. Now, I am perfectly aware that sometimes having these conversations with adolescents can be difficult, can be tricky. But again, it's about opening the door and it's there. If they want to go through it, they can. If they don't, that's also fine. And so these familial rituals can promote communication, lower risk behaviors, and increase kind of adolescent well-being as well. And finally, you know, evidence consistently shows that approaches that directly tackle gender norms are the most effective in engaging men and boys in healthy masculinity and in behavior change as well. And so efforts that are ongoing and consistent are the most effective. And this approach is called the gender transformative approach. And we're looking to directly transform the gender norms that people hold. And the home is the perfect environment to drip feed consistently over years and years this gender transformative approach. And so what I'd like you to think about, just as we come to the end of the webinar, is what's one small shift you could try in your parenting this week to help your young man promote and embody healthy masculinity, to have these conversations with him about what it means to be a man, etc. Boys today are struggling, right? You know, and that's not through some inherent issue with them, but through a kind of constellation of difficulties and needs that maybe aren't being met. Crucially, because unhealthy masculinity is limiting them. It's forcing them into a mold that doesn't serve them or anybody else in our society. And so what we want to do is equip our boys to be the healthiest, most connected version of themselves, and view boys from a position of possibility, positivity, empathy, and support them to develop the best versions of their identities and their personalities. That's all that healthy masculinity is. It's helping our young boys to develop their most positive identities. And this is going to enrich not only their own lives, but the lives of everybody around them in their communities. And so promoting healthy masculinity requires that our boys feel supported, heard, validated, seen, and championed, and requires that we as a culture intentionally and repetitively guide them towards positive identities that promote their own and everybody else's well-being. And as Bell Hooks says in her wonderful book, their wonderful book, which I've got back there, which is The Will to Change, which is just an amazing book I recommend to everybody, mentions that we want to touch the hearts of real men, not by demanding that they give up manhood or maleness, but by asking that they allow its meaning to be transformed into something that works for all of us. And this isn't about telling boys who to be, it's about giving them permission to be fully human, vulnerable, and connected. When boys feel safe to be soft, curious, expressive, and empathetic, they don't lose strength, they gain freedom, they gain authenticity. And this freedom benefits men and boys, but also women and girls, the LGBTQ plus community, and everybody in our communities as well. You know, if we can all imagine a world where all men felt free to and encouraged to live authentic, healthy lives, you know, what a world that would be. We're definitely on our way to that, on our first steps to getting there. But part of the process is that we're all equipped to be helping each other embody healthy masculinity, particularly in the formative years, adolescence, etc. So that's all we've got time for today. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. You know, I'm very excited to come and work tomorrow with the Year 8s, meet the Forest community, etc. If you have any questions, then here's some further reading. In fact, I really recommend Richard Reeves. Has some really interesting things to say about men and masculinity, the issues facing men and boys. And there's a variety of other books that are really useful for understanding masculinity and the issues that are going on for boys and men at the moment as well. And then finally, we also have a link to our website there if you want to have a look at our website. We also have a feedback form. At the end of the feedback form, you'll see a link to take you to a Google folder that has a whole set of resources that kind of follow on from the webinar to help you put into place some of the learning, some of the understanding, some of the tools from this webinar as well. So if you fill in the feedback form, it'll take you to that Google Drive, Google folder at the end. So yeah, thank you very much, everybody. If anybody has any questions, please let us know. We've got a bit of time now to ask me any questions, to have a bit of dialogue around that. Yeah. If not, if nobody has any questions, then you know where the pastoral team at Forest School is, and you can always find my email on our website as well.